Welcome along to DigiShift 89. We're going to be exploring a new AI playbook for charities today. So we're joined by Ed Baldry and Suzanne Begley from the organisation Make Sense of It. We're going to be talking about the AI playbook for charities. Everyone knows the rapid pace of AI development and it's shown no signs of slowing at the moment. We're going to be talking today about all aspects of AI and what it looks like in terms of kind of practical, actionable steps for you as charity professionals. We'll be exploring some of the ethics around AI and some of the big questions that you should be asking, not just in an operational sense, but in a governance sense as well. So we're hoping to cover quite a lot, and we'll pick out some of the elements of the playbook itself, such as the kind of foundations of AI, risks and harms, and we'll look at some of the kind of practical tools and applications. So I'm going to hand over to Ed and Suzanne. I don't want to kind of waste any time on this one because we've got so much to cover today. Yeah, Suzanne.
All right, I'm going to do a bit of a share screen now. So, let's have a look there. Okay. Righty-ho. All right. Hello, everyone. Without further ado, I'm Suzanne. Just to introduce myself a bit, I started my career in digital when it was called the internet. Which is about 25 years now. And I started doing online banking and e-commerce. Then I realized that there were more inspiring problems or problems that inspired me more in the charity sector. So I left the commercial world and joined the charity sector. And I've worked inside and alongside clients. I've spent a lot of time in agencies, but I've also had a job with leading digital transformation internally. And I think I'm primarily interested in digital service delivery and, how it's been such a terrific source of innovation, I think, in the sector over the last 20 years. So in some respects, the kind of conversation around AI feels quite familiar to me in that it's thinking about people and how we respond to change and how we respond to uncertainty and, going out into the unknown, how we approach that. So that's my perspective on things. I'll let Ed introduce himself.
Wouldn't be a Zoom call if somebody wasn't muted when they needed to be talking. Hi, everyone. Similarly to Suzanne, have been inside or alongside charities for most of my career. This year is my 20th anniversary of starting the world of work. I started working with Contact Family, who is a charity for children with, or families with children with disabilities. I have been working with artificial intelligence, though, now since 2017. I was leading a design team at Dyson where we started integrating machine learning and AI, ran a startup, and there's some very interesting things I think out of sector experience can bring in sector. So excited to be here. Was excited that John and Ross and Maddie as well were so interested in the AI playbook enough to put us in DigiShift 89. Very excited to be here. So hopefully we can cover what we've talked about within that. Suzanne, I'll hand back to you.
And we are Make Sense of It, and we started Make Sense of It. We're new. We officially launched in January, and I think we're a small agency. It's myself and Ed at the moment, and I think we found ourselves, what our objective is to help charities respond to what feels like this constant change right now. And we ourselves wanted to set up as an agency that was able to respond to that need for change. So we want to be really super flexible and really agile in the sort of small a sense of it. I think we know that charities are working with these, increasingly complex challenges within increasingly complex ecosystems. The political, economic and social systems all feel incredibly difficult right now. And I think our feeling is that we want to embrace this complexity and, we want to really tackle the hard stuff to create more impact. But ultimately we want charities to, feel empowered to solve their own challenges. And, our role, we see it is as, building out services, upskilling teams and, increasing trust in organizations. So so, you know, charities can, you know, feel better able to tackle these, you know, complex challenges. And obviously we want to do that in ways that are ethical and importantly affordable, you know. So we you know, we've really seen the costs of some of these things come down recently, and we have a sense that charities haven't always been getting great value from their suppliers, but we can come back to that in a little bit. So why did we write the AI Playbook? I mean, I think there was a, you know, does anyone want to contribute more content about AI at the moment when everyone's inboxes are completely overflowing with it, and it's impossible to go on LinkedIn without someone, you know, talking to you, shouting in your face about AI. I think we still felt there was a big role for someone to talk specifically about AI and its applications for the charity sector. I think, you know, we could see how artificial intelligence was transforming how organizations operate. And we were, you know, worried that charities risk being left behind. So we wanted to write something that spoke directly to charities and made the opportunity feel relevant and hopefully interesting. I think one of the things we've seen, one of the challenges is that the technology is advancing really, really fast. And charities, with good reason, typically move forward more slowly and carefully. So I think we wanted to give some guidance from our real world experience about how people could get started, how charities could get started, and give them confidence to explore and start building capabilities in this. You know, we're really aware that AI is, you know, requires a balance. You know, we are as uneasy as everyone else is about some of the potential bad outcomes of AI, but, you know, we believe there's a real opportunity here for charities, but, you know, only if it aligns with our values, and, you know, it needs to be mission oriented. So I think that's very much the focus of the AI Playbook. I'd say we wanted to move away from the theory and conceptual stuff, which is all very interesting, but perhaps not immediately useful, and think about what it means in practice and how its impacts will be felt in your organization. So we've looked at these kind of 4 key areas. Augmentation, what does it mean for individuals and teams? 2, integration, which we'll sometimes call automation. What's it mean for your organizational processes? 3, outsourcing. So what's it mean for your supplier relationships and procurement and new product development? And I imagine that quite a lot of the people on this call today, if you work in digital, probably have these relationships with external suppliers. So thinking through how those might develop. And 4, we don't touch on this in the playbook, but it's something Ed and I are thinking quite a bit about, is, you know, the business model. What could it mean for the future of your charity? You know, fundamentally, what constraints does this now overcome potentially, and what new opportunities does it give us? So augmentation we'll start with, enabling team members to do more than they could previously do. And I suspect this looks familiar to a lot of people here. This is Claude. This is the Anthropic model, large language model. And I personally use Claude a lot to help me with knowledge work. So that might be synthesizing information quickly and pulling out key insights. It might be about how to structure a document, a report, or, you know, challenge my thinking on things in a sort of dialogue, or role playing sort of different perspectives on things. And I suspect that many people on this call are probably using similar type tools to augment their work now, and, you know, help them do their jobs. Augmentation at its core is that the AI is supporting rather than directing decision making. So that stays very much with the human. And we talk in the AI Playbook about how it begins with human intent and it ends with human judgment. So with augmentation, the machine is very much in the middle of what you're doing, basically. And we've been working with Breast Cancer Now to understand, you know, their objectives and how they want to use augmentation and generative AI to, you know, to support their work. And, you know, that's around ideas generation, data summaries, pattern identification and research, which is obviously, you know, massive. in medical health sciences, and report writing to organizational standards. So these are some of the things that they are thinking about as an organization. And we've been talking to them about how they can access the tools, what their procurement looks like, what the training support and policies around that might look like, so that people are able to use these tools in ways that feel responsible and safe. Another sort of form of augmentation, I think, is not at the individual level, but at the team and organizational level. And one of the big use cases we're seeing really is in this kind of knowledge management. And this is Chat RNIB, which brings together, this is a tool for their helpline staff, and it brings together all their internal documentation into a searchable knowledge base. So it combines their specialist knowledge with natural language processing, so that they can get really fast and accurate answers for helpline staff to respond to people on the phone. I think, you know, as we all know from working in charities, they often rely on a few key individuals with these amazing organizational knowledge for information sharing. But as you know, data grows, we need more sustainable solutions. So this ability to sort of augment our knowledge, I think, is a really important use case. Ed, shall I be quiet for a moment and hand over to you?
Sounds good. I'm going to have to do some sort of like holding up my hand to let you know that to move on. Cool. I should just clarify, the breast cancer now stuff was in previous existence with Torchbox. Worked with them on it. Lots of experience with it, but was happening over the course of last year. But certainly getting a lot of value from it. So yes, so let's talk about integration, which sometimes gets called automation. We deliberately took the view that automation isn't necessarily that helpful because it implies that you're just replacing like for like, where we actually think you can do much more interesting things now if you think about how AI could integrate within a process. I guess next slide. This is about the slightly scary position where a machine can be making decisions, right? And automation integration has been around for a very long time. This is the traditional form of AI. This is really where you want artificial intelligence to behave like a calculator. If you have 2 + 2, you want it to equal 4. So not like current large language models that can get creative with the answers throughout. So it's about humans setting parameters, the machine executing, and then it's the human using oversight and intervention to make sure that it is delivering value. And this can be super helpful. This is about, from our perspective, it's all of these things that are on the side. So yeah, it's improving processes, adapting to demand 24/7. But the bit that's really important is this final point. It's about scale. So it's about being able to deliver more with less. Suzanne at the top of the presentation was talking about this increase in complexity, increase in requests for support, requests for attention. We're being pulled in lots of different directions. And being able to do more with less is going to be an essential quality as we move forwards. And one of the places where I think is a really good example of this, again, is a project that I was loosely involved with last year. I helped with some of the facilitation of workshops and getting to this idea of using artificial intelligence within the work was with London Museum. And London Museum has, I mean, a terrifying quantity of artifacts and information and data. They did the very traditional thing of museums of, you know, if you landed on the web page and it was a coin, all of the suggestions would be to go to see other coins. Oh, you like a coin? Well, I have loads of coins to show you. But that's not normally what we're interested in, right? Like, coins are really interesting because they show the monarch that's on them. They show the trade routes that are happening. They show the, you know, where these materials have come from. There are all of these lateral connections that you can start producing. But as humans, as people who are, you know, writing these things up, we might not necessarily have all of that knowledge. We might not necessarily have the time to do it. Machines can think of all of these connections though, right? They can start building all of these graphs out. And so you end up in this really wonderful place where, because you've been able to integrate AI into the process, you can give a richer experience to beneficiaries. You can free up time for people to be doing other work and doing other exploration. But then almost as cool as you get a foundation to do other things on top of it, right? You've built this foundation, and you can then build other experiences around it. And I think it's just a really wonderful example, and was hats off to London Museum for being brave enough to do it. I think it's going to be really interesting in the next few years. Charities starting to think about, okay, what was previously impossible? What was previously a constraint on us? Maybe we could only support one hospital, or we could only collect data from 10 spaces. Maybe we can now collect it from 100 places, or support 1,000 different things, because we're starting to integrate AI. And I think there might be a rhetorical question on the next question. Would love to folks to start thinking about this, but it's not about the standard way of thinking about automation is very much, oh, we've got this boring process that no one really wants to do. Can we just get a machine to do it, right? Yeah, and there's value there, right? Like, maybe you are needing to get data from one spreadsheet into another spreadsheet. Probably getting a machine in the middle there is helpful, but I think the real value, quote unquote, magic can happen when we start thinking about what was previously impossible that might now be possible. Suzanne, I'll hand back to you to.
Smashing. Thanks, Ed. Oops. Here we go. Outsourcing. So working with suppliers, from digital agencies to accountants to marketing agencies, the whole range. We're going to talk more specifically about digital agencies because we think that's what people here are interested in, rather than working with accounting systems. But do show if that's not the case. I mean, we think this is the place where most charities are probably already engaging with AI, and if they're not, they probably should be, because we think it is an opportunity to deliver much greater value. And I think we do feel quite opinionated about this, because we are one of these suppliers, and I think we can see for ourselves the benefit of using AI, and the fact that it's enabled us to have much faster turnarounds at much lower costs, and create better outputs and more outputs much of the time. So I think we're quite we ourselves are quite persuaded of this, and feel like we feel quite strongly that this should be happening. Obviously, when you're working with suppliers, though, you do need to make sure that they are using AI responsibly, and that there is data control, data protection and quality controls in place. So all of those things are really important. But I think, it does offer the opportunity in the work that you're commissioning to get, deeper insights, extract deeper insights, and, potentially see more innovation from your suppliers. And we just wanted to talk about a project that we've been working on with a charity called Hearing Dogs. And Hearing Dogs came to us with a fundraising challenge, which is that they wanted to look at potential subscription models around their income generation. And they had some ideas around this. There'd been quite a lot of kind of internal conversation. As we know, within charities, these things can be discussed over a while, and there were various groups of stakeholders who were interested. And so we were brought in to do a kind of innovation sprint around this concept, looking first at desirability around this, and then the kind of feasibility and viability of it. Is it going to make money? What's the actual profit margin on this, and how difficult is it going to be to actually execute and run this thing? So I think, what we found doing this is that probably we spent about 2 weeks working on this, I think, Ed, and just Ed and myself with their team. And during that time, we were able to explore, we sort of landed on 3 potential routes for subscription services. And we were able to build those out into prototypes, which were kind of, fully high fidelity, things that could be shared with stakeholders and customers, in a way that we absolutely would not have been able to do, a number of years ago. So we were able to do that. And then at the same time, we were able to look much more, to give much more sort of thorough thought to this kind of viability and feasibility area of it, with a lot of financial modeling. And, you know, looking, which enabled them to, you know, giving them fully interactive tools, which were able to let them look at, you know, their costs, their margins, their, you know, all of these things basically, to see whether this was really a goer for them or not. And, you know, unfortunately, in this instance, this story ends with no. Actually, we don't think that this is a good income generation opportunity for us at the moment. Certainly, the project the one they were most interested in. But I think that what I think in that is that it saved them a huge amount of time. Because actually, I think it's one of those projects that probably could have kind of lingered on for many months, if not longer, trying to get off the ground. And actually, you know, consumed a lot of people's time and energy. So I think even though it was a kind of disappointing conclusion, I think it was a useful one for the client. So in terms of accelerating digital, which we're assuming is what a lot of people here are probably going to be interested in, I think, you know, the use where we've seen AI, you know, where its strengths are is really that development can be done much quicker. And Ed is real, you know, can really talk about this in a lot more detail. I think, you know, the modern digital infrastructure means that we're not reinventing and needing to build things all the time, which means that small teams can deliver really big results. And I think we can now invest in sort of niche digital services, or digital services for sort of smaller groups, basically, that we probably wouldn't have considered before, that we wouldn't have thought that was viable, because everything costs so much that it had to have a very large market that we were targeting. And I think, you know, the other point is that digital services can adapt as things change with smart assembly. So we're not having to rebuild things in the same way that we were before. So that adaptability can be built into the system from the start. So I think that massively changes all sorts of things in this, but it very much changes the economics of it as well, and the cost. And then don't worry, we are nearly done. I know we've talked quite a bit here, but just the last kind of thought on this is business modeling. So if AI isn't just a tool to do your current work, it's an opportunity to question whether we're doing the right work at all. You know, so if, you know, an example of this being, if people are going to ChatGPT for their information and advice around certain things that support charities typically gave, what does that mean now? What's our role if people are going to another sort of destination or service for that type of thing? You know, I think we've seen recently, is it in the Harvard Business Review, where the number one use case for ChatGPT is therapy at the moment, you know, so, which is quite wild, isn't it? But if that's, you know, what does that mean for therapists then? You know, so I think these, you know, how might it reshape our service delivery model? What constraints is it lifting from our charity, as Ed was talking about before? What new value might it let us create? And, you know, how might it allow us to rethink our purpose around that? So yeah, that's us.
Great, thank you very much. I feel like we could have given you like a longer time slot, because it is a really great resource. So I'm going to wave the book now. So this guide is online, but you can also buy a copy and take it to the beach. At the minute in Scotland, if you took it to the beach, you probably get it quite wet. But it's a really good resource. So I'm going to just ask a couple of quick questions while you all think about other questions. And I know that it might feel like you want to have a very smart question, but I'm sure any questions are welcome. I think it's a really fantastic resource. So I know you opened with, why do we need another AI resource? Because there's been a lot around. You know, we did something in 2023 at SCVO, but I think this is a really significant contribution, because it really connects with the kind of business questions that charities are asking. I think for me, I was really interested in the prototyping example there, because that's so often a barrier for charities, where you have an idea, but the cost of testing it is quite high. And that either means you don't move any further with it, or you just kind of say, right, well, we've spent a lot of money in design now, so we better just do it anyway. So I think that's a very interesting benefit. I think for me, a question it raises is, what does that mean for agencies then? Because if you traditionally spend quite a bit of your budget and time on the prototyping or design process, what does your resource look like now? And do you feel like it's maybe changing the way that people approach projects in terms of the time frame?
Yes, I mean, one of the reasons why Suzanne and I set up the agency was because we felt like, AI fundamentally is going to alter that agency relationship. If two people can do what a 6-person or a 10-person team previously did, well, we need to make sure that we're delivering the value to charities. We feel very strongly about the need to support and give value for money to the third sector, and so we felt we needed to rearrange the business model to do that. And I think the prototyping one is a really good example. I was stuck it was about 18 months on a project. I was in-house, where it was that classic first solution to the problem had arrived, and pretty much after a month everyone could see it was the wrong solution, but we'd got the funding, we'd convinced the chief executives. It was just this like runaway train it had left the station and it was gonna go to the end, and it was such a waste of energy for everybody involved, for the beneficiaries that came to the workshops, for us who were working on it in the team, for the funders. And I think that prototyping is really fundamental, that we can now actually upfront start asking some of those questions. And so, to the question of what does the agency do to support? Well, it's about convening, it's about bringing together people so that we can think about those co-design sessions, so that we can think about enabling people to actually tangibly get to, okay, I've got this idea, okay, I can actually feel the artifact in front of me and I'm clicking on it. And Suzanne mentioned the hearing dogs subscription box, and it was very much, we could build the tool that enabled them to see the best possible box that they would get for the money they were wanting to put into it, and they could see, well, actually maybe it's not viable in a way that would have taken much longer to get to further down the line. So I think it opens up lots of really interesting opportunities for charities. I think it makes the world slightly more difficult for agencies. That business model of having, a big team coding for 6 months is not, it hasn't completely disappeared yet. There are certain use cases where that's still valuable, but it's becoming a lot less valuable. And it's about being lean and moving with the times to deliver the best value we can do for charities. Suzanne.
I think there is a new challenge of abundance. If you can have 200 versions of something, and there were points where we were working on the hearing dog stuff where I think we were using ideogram, and it just churns visuals at you, just so many of them all the time. So you've then got a slightly different challenge of, well, what is good here?
Yeah.
And, I think there's a role for agencies and, in partnership with clients to be having more of a challenging conversation around that. Well, what's our criteria for this? What does good look like here? So I think it's not without a whole other set of challenges. I think there's still a massive role to be played, but it's a different role around quality and impact.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I think editing, taste, all of those dynamics that maybe haven't been popular for the last 20 years, but some of those come back because of the abundance and needing to whittle down things, and also not overwhelming, as an agency, not overwhelming our clients, our partners with too much choice. It's some of it is about taking away the complexity to allow people to actually focus on the work and give people confidence that they don't need to know every ins and outs of neural networks or transformer models or any of that. Like, it's not relevant, just in the same way that you didn't need to understand how TCP/IP works in order to get value out of digital transformation, right? You don't need to understand the guts. have confidence to give that to the agency.
Great. Thank you. We're now getting questions, which is fantastic. So I'd like to take a hand from Jennifer, and then Paddy's popped a question in chat. Paddy, feel free when it's your turn to chip in with that, or we can read it out for you. But do you want to go first, Jennifer?
Hi, yeah, this is really interesting. We are currently looking at developing some ideas. So we had a development day, and so we were working with the board, and we've got lots of actors, so there's lots of different ideas coming out. And we kind of pulled them together into about half a dozen. But I did use AI quite, I think it was really useful in just going through all the notes that we had, pulling those together in a good sensible way, and it did it really quickly. And also I felt it was much more even-handed than I would have been, because I would have probably brought judgment and it would have ended up being a little bit different. But so I felt that was really useful. But I'm wondering now, we're at the stage where we're trying to evaluate which ideas we would want to go forward with and which ones we would feel are less effective, which is a bit like what, it's probably a less in-depth version of what you were talking about with the hearing dogs. And I'm kind of wondering if there's any particular ways of doing things that you could suggest, or pieces of software, or do you think this is the sort of thing that you would go to people like yourselves and spend a lot of money on? We don't have a lot of money, so I'm just saying.
Jennifer, are you able to elaborate a bit on the sort of challenges, the ideas that you need to test?
Okay, so we're a really small charity, and we work primarily with children and young people with physical disabilities, and we have kind of two parts to it. There's the speech part of it, which is cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, where speech is affected, and we use drama to try and help children gain confidence and gain different skills and strategies. But we also developed a kind of filmmaking arm of this to try and, because we started during COVID, brilliantly timed, and so we started to look at how we might capture what we've been doing, so that we started a kind of film arm of this. So we've now got lots of suggestions, so things like, do we start to work with more mainstream younger children, because they don't have a diagnosis normally at that stage, but there's lots of issues around speech in early years. So we feel that's an opportunity. Building an accessible film school is another idea that came out, which is actually a very clear one, and would involve working with lots of partners. So there's there are things that we could do that might generate some cash. There are things that we could do that we would definitely get grant funding for. There's lots of issues around partnership, because the groups that we work with are quite niche groups, small numbers. They're difficult to find. So we need to kind of increase our visibility so that people can actually find us.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of doing those kind of opportunity backlogs, I think there is a role for suppliers to help with that, and convene in those situations. I think what it sounds like what you're thinking about at the moment is still more at the sort of exploratory level, rather than what we were doing with hearing dogs, where we were getting into full sort of execution and exactly what it was going to cost and all the desirability factors and stuff. So I think it probably still is worth having some kind of external consultant potentially, Jennifer. I don't think that needs to be a massively expensive piece of work, though. I think there's also the question in your work about coming back to that business model with AI, how might that change some of these ideas that you've got? How might it make it more cost effective, give you more reach, allow a small team to create more and do more with less? So I think there's, it is probably worth engaging externally on that. I don't know what you think, Ed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an early stage innovation problem of balancing, viability, feasibility, and desirability together, and then prioritizing between them, which we had before AI, I guess, and we'll continue to have forever, because we're still always going to be slightly resource constrained. And I think it's one of the benefits of having external people sometimes is that facilitation and being able to potentially have a slightly more impartial view of things. AI can be helpful for them, in terms of one of the things we did with hearing dogs was to, be able to run simulations of based on, assumptions A, B, and C, where's that going to take you from a financial perspective. So you can get to richer answers or have more data, but ultimately it's going to be a judgment call for you and your organization, with the support of people externally, if you can, bring them in.
Great. There's probably loads more. I mean, I think the questions we'll get today, there'll be ones which would have a DigiShift each their own, but what I'm going to do is take us to the list of questions now, because we've got quite a few. So Paddy, I think you were next in the queue. Do you want to ask your own question, or do you want me to give a quick précis of it from the chat? Hi,
Fine.
Paddy.
Hi.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you all as well.
You.
So yeah, just something I'm interested in as someone who kind of supports organizations to do more meaningful participation is how you see these tools enabling that within communities. I'd said in the question that often groups or people are given a lot of information and asked to make decisions in a short time frame, and it can become quite tokenistic. But I'm going to add another element to that question is having delivered workshops on community-led action research. There's a media literacy angle to it. And what we discovered was there's a lot of distrust with AI within communities. So how do you use these tools to enable more meaningful participation, but build that trust in using these tools at the same time? Big question, so don't expect a full answer, but just to put that out into the universe. Thank you.
It's a good question. I was lucky enough to work with a really cool charity called Our Future, who are working. They started working in Grimsby, and they're now working in a few other small towns around England at the moment, principally. And sort of similar challenge of how do you engage people, how do you translate really big, broad government level policy down into actually something that makes sense to somebody on a day-to-day. I think where AI felt very helpful was with a form of translation, right? You're looking at taking these big, weird, amorphous sometimes thoughts and getting them into pithy bullet points or simpler sentences that in a way that we would normally talk. And actually large language models are really very good at that, because they're built on conversations that humans have been having on the internet, and it's very good at allowing people to describe it in different ways and explain it in different ways. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at. The distrust point is an important one. And I think one of the ways around that is to be transparent about what you're doing. There's quite a lot of research now emerging that people actually prefer AI written content when they aren't aware that it's AI. So if you're told that something is made by artificial intelligence and we're biased against it, but if you don't actually, you read it, it's easier to read because it follows the patterns that we expect it to follow. There's a really awkward tension there that's going to take a couple of years to work out, but it doesn't feel dissimilar to where we were with Google in the early 2000s. I remember a sort of similar thing, that somehow asking Google was cheating, and that that's just disappeared in the last decade completely. So I suspect that will work itself out.
I might keep us moving along if that's okay, just because we've got quite a few, but I think that's a really interesting question about it being an enabler for people understanding what content. Paddy, I hope you feel we haven't skimmed over it too quickly, but it was a really good question. I've tried to start numbering some questions in chat. So I think the next one, which again might be a short answer, is Hilary on useful lists of key AI tools that relate to different business uses. Before Ed and Suzanne jump in with that, I have seen one early example of that was from the Civic AI Observatory. So that's Newspeak House and Nesta in London. And they did a big guide and a post, which is a very long kind of survey of lots of different platforms and their use cases. I think one of the challenges with that is to make it comprehensive. It's quite hard to make it in depth, and it moves so quickly that you find it's very context dependent. I'll link to this that guide in a wee second, but I'll just pass to Ed and Suzanne if they want to shed any more light on that point.
I mean, I think what you said there, John, sort of probably covers our perspective on this, in that, you know, we're constantly updating our own knowledge on it, you know, and it can feel quite relentless, you know, trying to make sure that you're on top of the best tools for the job. I think there's also an extent to which we find, you know, we find the tools that we like to do things with our own workflows. Yeah, I know from my sort of personal use, but Ed and I use multiple models that we've just found we like doing for various different things. So, you know, I know, Ed, you prefer Gemini for coding tasks, and, you know, so it's quite dependent. But I think, yeah, staying on top of the best tool for the job does feel like it's you know, a bit of a task in itself at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you could say there's a sort of meta skill there, which is a bit like Ed's point about you're maybe not going to agencies for prototyping, but internally you're growing a skill of saying we're going to collectively practice and share knowledge.
I think that's a really excellent point, John. I think maybe that is the trick here, which is about having, you know, making the space for the conversations around those things and sharing with colleagues, you know, having a very transparent conversation around that, I think.
I think one watch out, I know there are lots of questions, but one watch out is, from my experience of having done quite a lot of work with charities looking for commercial off-the-shelf tools, is that sometimes there aren't tools that are servicing the niches that charities are servicing. Charities tend to be on the edges of the proverbial bell curve, right? And, you know, most of the commercial off-the-shelf tools tend to be aiming for that, you know, middle of the road marketing team type commercial world. So that's just a watch out. There are lots of very useful ones, but sometimes there isn't the perfect tool.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll just keep down the list. So the next question I had was from Heather, which is one about social isolation. So Heather, I don't know if you wanted to ask the question yourself, or can we take a summary?
Yeah, I'll jump on. Oh, sorry, my camera's really close.
Hello.
So our organisation's Dates and Mates, and we have a big focus on tackling social isolation within our community. We're also a really small team, so we do rely on elements of AI, and we're very open with our community about how we're using it, as well as you know, ways that they could potentially use it for life. So I'm finding a lot more people are starting to use ChatGPT to mimic having social interactions with people. So I want to continue having these really open conversations, but about how to balance it with, you know, kind of the purpose of our charity, which is to be out meeting real people, but I don't want to scare them or like deter them from using it, because there's a lot of positives for us having used it. So I just wanted to know if there was any advice for facilitating these kinds of conversations.
That's a really interesting one. I think we're all thinking a wee bit, because it's a very kind of unique example. Just to help people think about, I suppose maybe a thought would be, you probably already got kind of values about how you approach. I would guess you'll have a kind of etiquette or guide or code of conduct for how you run your events and things like that. And I think often it's about making sure your values are infused in the way that you're exploring the tools as well. So it would be about being totally open about what's going on, recognizing, you know, is it maybe a tool that can help people practice or get used to interactions if that's not something they've been doing for a while. But yeah.
Heather, do you convene conversations around it and you know, get people talking to each other about what they're finding useful in it, perhaps?
Yeah, so maybe not at like every event we do, but we do hold space for like, you know, different workshops about like around social isolation or using the internet to connect with friends, things like that. And if it kind of comes up naturally, then that's a bonus. So we do try and make it so it's not ever shut down. It's always, you know, we can talk about it and learn from each other's experience.
I think you raise a really good point there, which is this does sit on a continuum, you know, so I think, you know, the internet has allowed these connections to connect with other people and support and all sorts of types of things. So this is a continuation of that, although it feels different because people are having these, feel like more in-depth sort of social relationships with the machine.
Yeah, cool. So I'm going to keep moving through if that's okay, unless if anybody has a kind of a second thought or a quick thought about that, and particularly if anybody in the room has one on the socialization front, pop that in chat and we can open that up again a wee bit. But I just want to make sure we cover all the bases. We had quite a few questions on environmental impacts, and in the guide, I think you frame this really interesting way because you basically look at, what's the likely usage level from a charity in practice, and then look at measuring that. So it's a kind of bottom-up measure, which I think is a really interesting one. Obviously, what people often read about in the media is the global scale impact as well, which is significant, but interesting questions there.
Yeah.
I don't know, Ed, go for Ed.
I mean, I think the environmental piece is probably the biggest barrier I've seen to charities adopting it. And I think really valid to be concerned. I think the piece that I realized was that because we're thinking about it a lot, it might be bigger, it might be higher up on our list of priorities or our list of worries than maybe it warrants. And I think so data centers are consuming a lot of energy. I think currently it's 27% of the electricity in the Republic of Ireland is, going to data centers. So this is not insignificant. It's very, very definitely important. At the same time, as individuals, we're not having very much impact. Within the AI Playbook, we were comparing it to lighting within an office, and actually the lighting in the office is going to be consuming more energy than somebody's interaction with the large language model during the day. It's on an order of magnitude of moving a car a few meters is the sort of energy use that you're looking at when you're interacting with large language models. The frustration is that the Microsofts, the OpenAIs, even Anthropics, Google of this world have not been very good at publishing their data. So a lot of this is inference from the price that you're paying for the tokens that you're getting out of it. It's from some of the really excellent research that Sasha Lucioni at Hugging Face has been doing over the last few years, looking at the watts that are being used to power these GPUs and get AI to work. So yes, environment, a very big piece of the puzzle, but perhaps doesn't have as much impact as I think we worry about.
I guess just to come on to that as well as like reflecting on the fact that if we don't use AI, what is the energy usage of the 17 meetings we came to that decision, or the 45 times we redesigned something to come to that point? And I think, Paddy made a really good point in the chat about like you can be for intentional and low impact use of AI and still counter with the fact that if we take a very, very long time to do something that AI might take milliseconds to do, then the environmental impact doesn't even remotely square up. So I think when we're having these conversations, particularly at a governance level, it's thinking about the much broader picture.
I think that's a really good point, Ross. I think again in the playbook, I talk about doing some artwork, and if someone takes a few hours to do some artwork, again, exactly as you say, compared to 20 minutes if they're using AI, the two are they're on order of magnitudes difference, with the AI using substantially less energy because the individual's computer is working for less time.
Yeah, great. And I think I've just popped the link to the Hugging Face leaderboard in there, but I think it is a really interesting area where it's like at that individual level, probably not the biggest thing, but it is thinking about what does the longer term future look like if we're all making 700 prototypes of everything. But we probably wouldn't do that anyway because we couldn't decide. So yeah, so that segued us a wee bit into, I'm just aware we've got about 7 minutes left, so I think we've got probably time for 2 questions. This is a question from Janine, which is particular issues for decision makers, board trustees in relation to ethics and governance. So maybe are there kind of a few key issues that boards would need to be particularly mindful of as organizations explore AI? Go for it, Suzanne.
Are there any? I think some of our feeling around this is that, so Ed has worked with quite a few organizations around kind of AI policies and governance around this, and we frequently have conversations around this. I think there are now quite a lot of resources out there and statements by people like, you know, the National Lottery Fund around use of AI in grant applications and all sorts of bits of kind of you know, guidance and advice from very large respected bodies there now that I think I would point boards towards. You know, I think there are quite a lot of reassuring noises and or template guidance that can be used now. I don't think boards should feel they're on their own and needing to make this up from scratch. I think, you know, that's the advice that we've been giving to people recently. You know, we talk to a lot of people around, you know, how they should approach funding and, you know, ethical use of AI and how their, you know, how their governance, how they should respond to that. So I think there are increasingly sort of people we can look to support and reassure boards around that. So that wasn't a particularly great answer, John.
Don't worry. Did you want to add anything, Ed?
No, I think that covers it. I think, yeah, it's about, this isn't new, right? This is about folding into existing policies and figuring out how to extend what already exists.
Yeah, we do have it in our AI guide. We have a section where we start to collect together organizational policies. That was Civic AI had done that. And I think one of the most interesting ones there that's a really helpful example is the BBC. The BBC put together their policy statement, and what they were saying is what's important to us is creativity and editorial integrity. So those two kind of North Stars are there for them. So they then use those to kind of inform some of the bigger policy points for them as an organization.
Yeah.
And I think it would be the same for a charity. You know, if you've got a particular mission around helping the most vulnerable or being really accessible to everyone, regardless of their educational background or whatever it might be, those kind of higher level points will probably help you understand what are the big things that are going to be important in a policy.
Yeah, and just to loop back to what Ed was just saying there, you've probably faced some of these risks and questions before when it's come to digitizing services. So they're probably there is a degree of experience already there in navigating some of this stuff. It is on more of a continuum than we sometimes imagine, I think.
Yeah. We're getting really close to our 11 o'clock finish, and I know one of our speakers has to get away something else at 11. I don't know if Ed or Suzanne, you wanted to give any wrap-up thoughts, or Ross as well. You've probably been thinking lots of stuff, but we've not given you much chance to talk. So I don't know if you wanted to jump in with a bit of a wrap-up reflection or thought.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like just going back to the governance and leadership point, that we need more people in leadership positions, whether it's chief execs or whether it's boards, who are taking actual responsibility for this stuff. And actually, like, as someone who works in an agency, like, we can't outsource the ethics and decision making around this. And it's a bit of a cop out for boards to just go, well, that's quite scary, we'll just tell charities they can't use it at all. Or we'll veer wildly to the other side, where I've seen loads of charities using AI with almost no boundaries or thought put around it as well. And there's something in the middle between those two things. But there's a real lack of leadership around that stuff at the moment, I think.
Yeah, I think to build on Ross's comment, one of the challenges for the sector is needing to walk this tightrope between AI is not going away. We need to engage with it, but we can't just uncritically say this is the most wonderful thing ever, because it isn't. There are lots of very difficult questions that, you know, we've mentioned environment. I know there are questions around copyright, that, you know, there's monopolies, there's lots of not positive parts to this, but at the same time, we'd be cutting off our nose to spite our face if we just say no, we're never touching it because it has bad elements to it. We need to engage with it so that we can deliver the benefits to beneficiaries, wider society with it.
Great. And that's probably a good note to wrap up on. You always have to kind of detect when's the best kind of last question. So it's been really fantastic to have your time, and Suzanne, and all the great questions. I know that we could probably have gone for another 20 minutes or so if we'd wanted to. I would encourage you to go and read the guide. It's free, and it's not just available in book and website format. You can listen to it, and you can download it and read it on your ebook reader if you want to as well. There's loads out there. And as I say, we'll do an email to everyone who's booked to give you the resources and links from this. So thanks again to our speakers and for the discussion this morning. Thanks very much, everyone. See you next time. And we'll be back end of next month, and we'll send an email with the details shortly. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.